Republican Senator Katie Britt, who offered the GOP response to President Biden's State of the Union address, has been mocked for days by pretty much everybody for her bizarre delivery. But on top of that, recent reporting indicates that one of the harrowing anecdotes she offered during her speech was actually from 20 years ago, not in the United States, and occurred during the presidency of Republican George W. Bush. But before we unpack all that, if you end up liking this video and you want to support the channel, please be sure to hit the like, subscribe, and alert bell before you go. I'd greatly appreciate it. All right, friends. So yeah, this is kind of bombshell new reporting, which further undermines the GOP's credibility, as well as the credibility of Katie Britt, who is the youngest Republican senator. Now, we did a video discussing her terrible, terrible delivery of the Republican response to President Biden's State of the Union address. But to be fair to her, Republican responses to State of the Union addresses have been historically terrible, right? So she's just the latest in a long line. Now, I have several clips to play. For context, I'm going to play a bit of the clip in which Senator Britt shares an anecdote, a very tragic, harrowing anecdote during her response to President Biden, suggesting very strongly that this occurred on Joe Biden's watch. We're going to play the clip and unpack it together.
She told me not just that she was raped every day, but how many times a day she was raped. The cartels put her on a mattress in a shoebox of a room, and they sent men through that door over and over again for hours and hours on end.
So her terrible delivery notwithstanding, obviously the details of that anecdote are disgusting. I mean, they really are. It's a tragedy. And again, the implication, given that she's talking about President Biden's border policies, President Biden's presidency in general, the very strong implication of that was, again, that tragic, harrowing anecdote occurred on Joe Biden's watch in the United States of America. And yet it appears to be the exact opposite. So CNBC and others are reporting on this. And again, we'll play some more clips. Biden rebuttal Senator Britt blasted for recycling a 20-year-old sex trafficking story to attack border policy. In her rebuttal to Biden's State of the Union, Katie Britt of Alabama used what appears to be a sex trafficking victim's experience from the early 2000s to condemn Joe Biden's current border policy. The victim Britt referenced was Carla Jacinto Romero, who was sex trafficked in Mexico, not the United States, Mexico, from 2004 to 2008, 20 years before Biden became president. Journalist Jonathan Katz first pieced together Britt's presentation of Jacinto Romero's experience in a TikTok video. We're not going to play that whole thing because it's 8 minutes, but I am going to play a bit of it there at the end. The woman in question was was later found out to be Carla Jacinto Romero, an activist who has publicly testified about her experience with sex trafficking. Britt seemingly attempted to present the anecdote as a damning example of Biden's border management. We wouldn't be okay with this happening in a third world country, she added. President Biden's border policies are a disgrace. This crisis is despicable. Okay, very obvious what Britt was trying to do. So this is the journalist in question, Jonathan Katz, and this is what he concludes.
There. It didn't happen in the United States. It's not an example of something that happened recently, or it's not even an example of something that happened on the border, and there's certainly not something that happened under Joe Biden. So why would she share that story? It seems very clear to me that what she's trying to do is she's trying to create an association in people's minds between Joe Biden, the border, Mexicans, Latin, people of Latin descent, something like that, and sexual violence. That's what she's going for. And she's doing it on the basis of what you can only say is just an out and out lie. She knows that she knows when this woman's experiences happened, because this woman has talked about them repeatedly. I'm sure she talked about them and gave very specific indications of when it happened at that press conference that she was at in Del Rio. It must have been very obvious to her, at the very least, that she wasn't talking to somebody who had recently been 12 years old. After I watched this, I looked up her spokesperson, which is never easy to find these days, but I found an email address for him. I sent him an email. I asked him for comment, if he could explain what the senator meant, if there was some other incident that she was talking about that I hadn't found. They haven't gotten back to me. If they do, I will update then. But for now, it just looks like she just got on national television and lied about something really horrific and really important, and for her own personal and her party's political gain.
Very despicable, but typical behavior from a Republican, certainly an elected Republican. Others have talked about while Katie Britt told a whopping lie during her State of the Union rebuttal with her story about a sex trafficking victim, and these are the only outlet sites covering it. Raw Story, Daily Kos, Democratic Underground, and NJ.com, which I assume is NewJersey.com, but I'm not sure exactly. As a matter of fact, if I have it here, people have attempted to reach out to, again, like others have attempted to reach out to Katie Britt's staff for corroboration. And there was a text message. I thought I had the link up here, but where the spokesperson actually said, what Katie Britt said was absolutely true, that this thing did occur, which, by the way, nobody denies. But then the spokesperson wouldn't admit that it happened prior to President Biden's presidency, or that it happened at his presidency. They just let the implication hang. And then they went on this tirade about Joe Biden's border policy. Again, obviously trying to draw a connection between the two without actually owning it, because apparently it's been exposed. Now, again, the performance, has already been widely criticized. She is getting flack from people on the right, conservative commentators, as we discussed. But this is going to make things considerably worse. And quite frankly, Democrats should pounce on this. Democrats should expose this. Democrats should say, listen, if you're going to criticize President Biden's border policy, do it, but do it correctly and forthrightly with evidence and anecdotes from now, not from 20 years ago in a different country when at the time this country was being led by a Republican president. But Republicans have never let facts get in the way of a good story. I doubt it'll change anytime soon, but let me know what you think in the comments.